So February of 2017, me and my wife and my stepson are living in Sand Springs, in a really, really tiny house. Um, but it was our house. I mean, we were renting it, but it was ours. Uh, but again, it's just a step up. We were better than we were a few months before this. Anyway, so my wife comes up to me and she tells me that she's pregnant. This is my third wife. Um, my first wife, she did end up pregnant, but other than that, I had never had anything even come close. I actually thought I was infertile. I thought that me getting my first wife pregnant was a fluke, to be honest. So I joked around with my wife and said, "Well, if my child ends up with having red hair, I know it's the mailman." I was joking, of course. Um, but a few weeks go by, and I'm working at Fowler and I'm hating it. There's a lot of corruption at that dealership. They were, I mean, they would, when I'd sell cars, um, if they got their bonus, they would hold my deals until the next month. That way they could get more money, but I don't get any more money. So I lose out. Uh, so, um, so I wasn't really liking it very much. But one day, um, on my way there, um, I was driving my truck and my wife was in there. My son was in school. Um, and there was this Chevy pickup truck, just old 80s something model Chevy pickup truck. Anyway, he was following us on several different roads. He was apparently going past where we were going. He wasn't intentionally following us, but he was on our ass. And I had to turn right, and so I ended up turning right. Well, he runs right into the back of me. Um, of course, I get out, and he immediately starts cussing me out and everything. And my wife says that I got in police officer haze mode. Um, I just wasn't going to put up with it, sitting there being hateful. I mean, an accident's an accident, but he hit me. I didn't hit him. He was following way too closely. Uh, then he found out that I used to be a police officer. I don't remember how he said found out or whatnot, but um, and he calmed down after that. And kind of find out he was actually on his way to the methadone clinic to get more methadone drugs, legal drugs, but he was addicted to methadone, and so he was on his way to get them. Well, my wife was a few months pregnant, and we called for the police and everything, but nobody ever showed up. So I ended up taking her to the hospital, and we actually ended up finding out that she had a she well later on we found out that she had a cyst on her placenta. They were actually thinking that it was possible that the baby wasn't even going to be born. Um, so it was a really rough, trying time. Um, and of course, we had to, fight this guy because then he suddenly wants to say that, he wouldn't even answer his attorneys or anything. So we couldn't get a hold of him because he was a doper. But he did have insurance, which was good. Uh, but anyway, so I didn't stay at Fowler too long. I only stayed there like I think 3 months. I absolutely hated it. I was almost getting out, and I was going to go back to law enforcement, which I knew that I shouldn't be doing. But there was a guy that worked in the finance department that um, he told me that I really needed to stop by Nelson Nissan. That they have kind of a reputation for being the type of person I am. And so I ended up going up there, and I ended up talking to going up to Nelson Nissan, and ended up talking to. Uh, I asked, to speak with the manager and stuff, and I ended up talking to this one guy, and we talked for 15 minutes, just joking around, just getting along. Come to find out, he was actually the general manager, um, and so I ended up getting in an interview, several different interviews, and they ended up hiring me. And I was told at that time it was actually pretty hard to get on there, but they saw something in me. Until I started, then my manager actually told me that, who's a friend of mine now, but he said that he actually thought that I was going to wash out, because well, they say to be able to sell cars, you have to smile and you have to get excited, and I don't do either one of them. And you have to talk to a lot of customers. I didn't do that either, but I was very consistent, and I talked with people, um, and and I actually tried to get to know people. I tried to figure out what they wanted and solve their problem, because that's what I was told we were doing. Um, so that's what I did, and I ended up, most of the time I could sell a car. In fact, I ended up selling twice as many cars as most of the guys there. In fact, my first year there, I got salesman of the year, so I actually knew how to sell. Um, and financially, I mean, I mean, I made 85,000 my first year, and I'd never made more than 35,000 in a year. Um, but something was still missing, and Nelson Nissan has a um, Bible study on Fridays. They did. I don't know if they still do or not, but they did have a Bible study on every Fridays. And I would go, and to be completely honest, I wasn't going because I really was trying to get closer to God or anything. I was just trying to get better at my job, and, rub elbows better, I guess. I don't know what you call it, but that wasn't my intention. Of course, I'm always trying to become a better person and everything. That wasn't it. But I wasn't trying to become a Christian because I didn't like Christians that much. Um, like I'd said before, they cared so much about my soul, but nobody ever asked me about my life, about my home life. Nothing. They weren't there. Um, and that's the majority of Christians. That's just the way they are. Um, they concentrate so much on hell, which I've read what Jesus wrote, and that's not at all what he concentrated on. Yeah, he talked about that to the Jews, but when he was talking to somebody else that was not a follower, he didn't talk about hell. He didn't talk about any of that. In fact, the only people he talked about that to were Jews, and Jews believed in hell. But that's still not the focus. There's nothing in the Bible that says that you have to believe in hell to go to heaven, you know. But anyway, I started going, and I started asking a lot of questions. Um, and I also, when I was working with my clients, I I tend to get really close with them. And when I can tell that they're struggling about something, I don't know how I could. I just could tell that they were struggling and they were having issues. I would talk with them, and some of them would just bawl in my office, you know, uh, and I do what I can to help to make them feel like their lives are better. There was this one girl. She was she was a young girl. Uh, I don't know. She was probably about 12, 13, 14. I can't remember, something around that age. But her uncle, I'm sorry, she was 16. Her uncle brought her up to buy her a vehicle, and look at vehicles. And she had just been abandoned by her mother. And, and she didn't know who her father was and everything. So her uncle took her in. and she was having a really hard time with it. And so I just, I talked to her a little bit, made her feel better, made her realize that, the world's not as evil as she thinks it is. And she can, it depends on what she wants to do with it. That she doesn't have to sit there and feel sorry for herself and everything. It's easy to do that, but she's got an opportunity, with her uncle. Well, anyway, he called me the next day and actually called me to thank me for talking to his niece. Said that it did really good, but I wasn't doing it for any kind of accolades. I wasn't doing it for anything. I didn't even end up selling him a car. Um, but I did that a lot, and I learned a valuable lesson. I learned that, my whole time as a police officer, I was trying so hard to make a difference in people's lives, and it just didn't feel like I did as much of a difference as I thought I did, or that I thought I would do. Um, but I learned that it's not about where you are or what position you're holding. It's about what you're doing. How you make yourself available. And so at that moment, I sparked an idea that I could help anybody anywhere. I don't have to be in law enforcement. I can be in car sales, but I still didn't feel like I didn't like car sales. Um, Even though I did good at it, I didn't like it. It just was not my thing. But suddenly I got this idea, because a couple of friends of mine came up to me, especially a buddy of mine. He was the fleet manager, and he told me that he appreciated the way I ministered to customers all the time. I didn't think I was, because I wasn't a Christian. I thought ministering was, you know, hitting somebody upside the head with the Bible, but that's apparently not what ministering is. Um, so the idea came to me that, I see a lot of people the way what the clothes they wear, and the only clothes that seem to have substance, that seem to be saying something positive, is Christian apparel. But the problem is most of the time it's really, really cheap, and it's really hokey. I mean, it's just, I'm blessed, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not helping anybody besides telling people, hey, look, I'm a Christian. I mean, what good is that doing? So I decided to start a t-shirt company. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know how to draw, didn't know anything about art, nothing about computers. I didn't even own a computer. I had a laptop at work, but it was not strong enough to do anything like this. But I but I had this drive. I had this want to do it. So I started, and so I started researching and everything, and I really like grunt style type stuff, more soldier type stuff. And so I was like, soldier of God. It doesn't mean Christian. It doesn't mean Muslim. It doesn't mean anything like that. It just means you're a soldier for God. Almost everybody believes in God. I mean, most people that say they're atheists aren't even atheists. They believe in something. They just don't know what it is. Um, but they don't think it's the God of the Bible, and so they assume that means that there's no God. But regardless, people believe in it. And so I was like, Soldier of God apparel. And so I started that. And so I started designing shirts. And God, I had a buddy there that worked, that was going to design for me. And oh my God, it was no, I don't know what he was smoking or what. It's like he was so lazy and suddenly decided to do it in a crunch time, because I've been waiting for weeks, that he just grabs like a bunch of pictures and just throws them on top of each other, literally. And this dude is like doing dope, shooting up dope and everything. And I mean, with a broken leg. And I mean, it's just really, really wicked. It was just something that just was, I wouldn't even see on on a freaking heavy metal shirt. I mean, it was just no, no. Um, and he got offended by that. He said that I just didn't understand art, which that's fine. I don't have to understand art. I just know nobody's going to buy that, and I'm not going to have that part of my company. So then I found another guy that he was a t-shirt designer, but come find out he wasn't really that great. I mean, it was like he could draw cartoon figures kind of stuff, but it was just, I just couldn't. So I was having a hard time at it. Uh, and then I was looking on Fiverr on this internet website that you're supposed to be able to contract people to do things for you, to draw shirts or whatnot, a bunch of other stuff. Well, I seen a shirt that was a grunt style shirt, which was weird to me because it's a real company. Why is it on here? And kind of find out this guy actually works for Grunt Style, but he also does subcontracting and stuff. As long as it doesn't compete against his company, he can do it. And so I started hiring him. And the first shirt we made was uh, uh, even soldiers carry swords. And it was designed because play on the Second Amendment kind of thing and stuff. And it's sort of popular and everything. But what really got people's attention was when I had made a shirt called Jesus is a Badass. I didn't think that was offensive. I mean, don't get me wrong, at that time, thinking about my mind at that time, because I was rather religious at that time. And I didn't want to do it because I thought that it was too vulgar. But something just kept telling me, and it just wouldn't leave me alone. And I kept praying about it. And and finally, a buddy of mine, the fleet manager, actually told me, I was like, I don't know if I hear from God. And he said, well, go out in the middle of the quiet. And when there's no noise, just listen. Pretty soon you'll hear from God. And so I did that. And the words came, own it. That, I was like, and then everybody the next day, like three different people told me to own something. They're like, oh, own it. Just own it. And I started doing that, and it made a huge difference. But after I made Salesman of the Year, let me back up a little bit. The very next year, uh, well, I finished that year off, and it wasn't a full year, so that year didn't really count. But the very next year, I made Salesman of the Year. The year after that, um, my back started hurting more, and I started not being as motivated to sell because they started not rewarding us like they did, and it felt good to be rewarded because I'd never been rewarded before. And when they stopped doing that, I stopped trying so hard. I wasn't intentionally; I just did. But then I found out that the part of my back problem is probably because I needed to take the rods out. I had my rods in there for 15 years. So we decided to do that surgery to take them out. And that was right before COVID. Uh, in fact, when I was healing, that's when COVID came around. Well, when I was on um, my medical leave, I actually decided to not come back. Um, I just really wanted to do my company. And also, and I was going to try to start working at a boat place. I did that for a couple of weeks and realized that that was extremely corrupt. So I quit. Um, yeah, sales just in car sales, it's rough, but man, it's really rough in RV and boat sales. Um, but anyway, so I called him up, and I told him that I quit and everything, but and we still talk. Me and the manager still talked every once in a while. Then he he calls me one day because I used to be a cop, and I'm still close with them. Hell, they still let me go and wash my truck at the car wash and everything. Um, but he asked me, he said, if I called the police department, would they sit on the lot and watch the lot for me? And I'm like, no. And unless you paid them $50 an hour, I said, what they'll do is they'll tell you that they'll do extra patrol, but that's going to be iffy if they even have time to do that. But nobody's going to sit there and wait for you or wait. And so he got off the phone with me, called them, calls me back a couple days later and says that that's exactly what happened. But then he asked me if I would watch the lot for $15 an hour. I can work as many hours as I want, and work the hours that I want. But there are people that are breaking in and stealing stuff out of the service vehicles. And so I thought about it. I was like, well, yeah, I need money. And so I started doing that. And I was like, well, that would be perfect because I can work on my company and do that at the same time. Well, my company did not take off as fast as possible. I made a lot of shirts, but I made a lot of mistakes. I kept on, at first I hired a SEO manager, and she, 3 months into it, and she still hadn't done anything. I don't have a website or anything. So I ended up firing her. But I ended up losing my money, like all my money that I gave her. I probably shouldn't have done that, but win, learn, whatever. So then I hired this other guy who told me that he's like, man, we can get it done in 2 weeks. It shouldn't have taken 3 months. We could get it done in 2 weeks. Fast forward 9 months. That was in March, February, March. Fast forward to October, and he still doesn't have my website done. And I keep on trying to get a hold of him. He doesn't answer my calls, answer my text messages, and so I finally call him, and I leave him an email and said that I am going to start selling this Friday regardless. And then he calls me and messages me and says, "Hey, can you meet up Friday?" I'm like, or Wednesday. I was like, yeah. So we met up Wednesday, and what? Sorry, we met up Wednesday, and he tells me that his company dissolved. Yeah, it probably dissolved months before this, but he never told me. And so I was just sitting there in utero, and so I was left with nothing. I had a partial website. Now backtrack a little while before any of this, and I'll get to my daughter. Uh, my daughter ended up they my wife they watched the pregnancy pretty closely, uh, and the baby after a few months the baby started uh, doing really well, but it still had this huge cyst on the placenta that was close to the baby. So they decided that they're going to induce labor, and so they um, we schedule the date to induce labor, and the date comes, and we get there, and I've been starving because we're been at the hospital for a while. And she said, "Well, I'm only at a 4, so it'll probably be several hours before I even get close to having this baby. So go ahead and go get something to eat." And the doctor wasn't even there yet, so I drove to Whataburger or something like that, just a few miles away. And while I'm in line, I just get the food, and she tells me to get there because she's going into labor. She already jumped up to like a 9. So I'm hurrying up over there, and I, uh, I actually passed by where uh, there was a wreck, and just barely a wreck. I passed it before the cops even got there, but that's where actually my doctor got stopped, or our doctor. But I finally get there on time and stuff. She hasn't had the baby yet, but I'm sitting there starving. And the, uh, the male nurse or male doctor was there just in case our doctor didn't show up. And he was going to use forceps and stuff like that. We were not having that. But doctor ended up showing up and everything. And so I actually ended up eating my burger while she was going into labor because, again, I was starving. I was about to pass out. But she asked me if I wanted to see my daughter coming out, and I did not. That's not a vision that I really wanted to ruin my mental picture. Um, but now it probably would have been different. But at that time, I mean, no. Uh, we'd we'd only been together for a couple of years, uh, like 2 or 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. Um, but but my daughter came out and she was beautiful. I mean, I can't explain it. I mean, people talk about it and everything else, but unless you've literally never had unconditional love, you have no idea what I'm talking about. You don't understand the bond, the instant love I have. I mean, you can say, "Well, I know we all have daughters. We're like that." I still, but you've been loved before. You've loved before. You've known that that person loved you and you loved them, and that nothing was ever going to change that. I've never had that. I've never had anybody that I knew for a fact that nothing was ever going to split us up. And when she was born, she was just the most gorgeous angel. I mean, I knew that she was born specifically because I needed her. I mean, that sounds horrible, but I mean, I was alone in the world. I know that's horrible to say because I had my wife, but I'd been married before. And now, granted, I've never been in love like I am with my wife. I've never been close to anybody like I am with my wife. But I've always had that fear that I'm going to end up being left alone again. That one day she's going to realize that she's better off without me. That she she could get a lot further in life. That she could be happier if she wasn't with me. And then I'm by myself again. And we have to start all over again. But when my daughter was born, all that disappeared. All of it. I mean, I'm never going to be alone again. You know, I but we stayed in the hospital for a couple of days. Um, I actually wasn't when I told my boss that my wife was being induced and I'll be back the next day. They told me not to. I was like, well, I need to work, because we were not doing good. I did not make salesman of the year yet. I just started there not too long before this, uh, but I ended up when my daughter was born. It's like everything just clicked, and I ended up selling 19 cars that month. Only one person sold more cars than me. Uh, and I mean, and then I ended up getting salesman of the month, you know, several times a year. Salesman of the year. I just started selling. Things just started clicking. But it was scary because, again, she having that car wreck. Um, we were, we were afraid that it did some damage, but it didn't at all. But she did have, she had problem with like her eye was leaking all the time, and she was her nose clogged up really bad. One night, I'm just we're in bed, and suddenly something hit me that something's wrong. I jump up, and Scooter can't breathe, um, and I immediately get her up, and I start doing uh, the Heimlich on her and stuff. Um, and after a few minutes, she actually uh, started breathing again, but or a couple of minutes, but it was scary. We ended up calling the EMS. Well, the firemen showed up, and one of the firemen decided to say it was nothing big. It was just the baby was just choking. I almost punched him right there. Luckily, another ambulance popped up and said no, that he wasn't just choking, because or she wasn't just choking because she quit breathing. We ended up taking her to the ER and stuff just to check her out and stuff, but she was relatively a not a very sick child. I mean, she wasn't like me. You know, I was sick all the time when I was a kid, but she wasn't. She isn't. Um, and it's funny. She actually came out with kind of reddish hair. It ended up turning blonde, but her ears were my ears. They went away over time, but you know, she was definitely my child. Um, but I life changed whenever she was born. My priorities changed, and you know, I started selling more, but then I felt like I needed to do something more. Um, I'm not meant to, you know. My dad's side of the family does nothing. When I met them, they don't have any goals or aspirations. And then my mom's side of the family, they get a job and stay there for their whole life. Yeah, they're successful and everything, but they don't volunteer doing anything. They don't do anything to better people's lives. Nothing. I mean, it's just both sides of the family. That's just the way they are. It's just I can't be that way. I'm not made that way. I truly believe that I went through the hell that I went through because I'm meant to help people. I meant to pull people out of that hell because it's this hell that we're living in. You know, the Jews and Christians like to talk about a hell, and you know the Muslims like to talk about a hell and stuff, but it's this earth plane we're on. This is the hell, and you don't have to choose to be here. Not like this. You can build any kind of earth plane you want, but you got to know you can. My daughter grew up pretty fast. Uh, she never crawled ever. She has never crawled. She's 6 now, and she has never crawled. And so I called her Scooter because she was always scooting everywhere. She scooted everywhere to go. She never crawled to get anywhere. And she went from standing up one day to a couple of days later walking. And that's just the way she did it. But she was always curious. And my type of teaching and parenting is not at all what I thought it would be. I thought I would be Mr. Strict and stuff. No, you stay in your bedroom. You do this. I'm not. I just can't. But I expect her to be, you know, respectful, um, not to be rude or anything like that. I mean, so she does have manners and stuff like that, but I do spoil the crap out of her. But in the meantime, Tristan is getting worse. My wife's son. He is, I mean, just constantly causing trouble at school. I mean, causing trouble at home, but it's just every day it's getting worse. I wake up in the morning and he is sitting outside of the front of the house by himself, and he is like 6 years old, like 5 or 6 years old, something like that. Um, or 7. He's young. He's really young. Um, and I told him he is not allowed to go out there by himself when we're in bed. And he was like, "Oh, I saw a snake on the porch." How? There's no way to even see the porch unless you open the door. Stuff. But he was always lying. And the very next day, he did it again, but did it on the back porch. It was constantly, and I was I was running out of steam. I mean, I was trying my damnedest, but he was just getting worse. But luckily, ever since we changed the way we approached his dad ended up getting a new girlfriend who is amazing. Uh, and we actually started getting along. I mean, we didn't fight about anything anymore. It just miraculously, it's just, and it it was because we listened to God. I mean, you could say it wasn't God or not, but I truly believe it was God, because things just started going so easy, you know. Um, but while we were uh, living there, we decided that a buddy of mine was moving out of his house. He owned the house, and he offered it to me, and we rented it. So we moved in and got into a bigger house. Um, and we've been, here for a few years now and stuff. But uh, it was nice. We keep on getting into a bigger place. We keep on things keep on being taken care of. I'm actually making now, since I when I quit selling cars, I went to $15 an hour, and I was actually able to move into a bigger house and be able to take care of things better than when I was making 85 grand a year. It doesn't make sense. I don't know how we did it. But we did. And everything was going great, but still, Tristan was just, man, he was getting worse. I mean, we had to buy a video system, a camera system all around their house to watch him, because he would lie and he would do stuff, and he would, I mean, put his sister in danger. I mean, one time he was sitting there, just decided to sling a knife out, a kitchen knife, and his sister walks around the corner and he almost stabbed her. I mean, he was always doing stuff like that. Um, but his sister, uh, she she knew how to stop me, because I started losing my temper. I really did. I was losing it. I couldn't understand how this kid cannot listen to a single damn word I said. I mean, he would hear part of the sentence, but the rest of it didn't matter. I mean, it's just, or he would completely lie about something that wouldn't even matter. I mean, if he would have told the truth, he wouldn't have been in trouble, because it was what he was supposed to be doing. Instead, he lied and got in trouble, even though he didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he was that big of a habitual liar. But his sister, anytime I'd start losing control, she would say, "Daddy, you need to stop, breathe." And I would calm down. Um, I mean, she just knew. I mean, I was in my room one day and I was just upset. And she walks in and says, Daddy, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm okay. She looks at me and she says, Daddy, are you okay? She's 4, you know, but she just knew. So when I say that she's my savior, she really is. I mean, everything I'm doing is for her. You know, she deserves a father that's actually trying to make the world a better place. You know, because it's going to be the world she's living in. But Tristan is has gotten to the point that, I mean, he's constantly grounded. He doesn't get to do anything, and I finally tell Sierra that I that he's just pushing the last nerve. He actually would I couldn't bust his ass anymore because I didn't even like busting ass. In fact, when I first moved in, I wouldn't because I was like, well, talking. That's what if I can talk. Well, that didn't work, and I'd keep progressing. Well, nothing works, and if I bust his ass any harder, I mean, it's child abuse. So I started getting, I started doing calisthenics exercises, stuff like that, chores, exercises. Um, Even got to the point where he just stands there and stares at the camera. But even then, hell, one time uh, my wife left and he was in there standing just watching the camera. Because that's what I told him to do. And then I happen to look at the camera and he's no longer there. I go up there in his room and he's not in there. And I start looking around for him. And I get back and he's back there. I asked him where he was. He's like, nowhere. And then I said, Tristan. He said, I was gonna try to. I was cleaning the closet. No, he just wanted to sit down, and he knew that if he sat down in front of the camera, he'd get in trouble. And so he went to the closet. And so, I mean, it was just everything. And finally, the last straw and was I decided, I'm like, you know what? When I was in football, we would take ice baths. It didn't hurt us, as long as you didn't stay in there too long. But it's actually really good for your muscles and everything. It's not abuse, but whenever you're a kid, it feels like abuse. It feels like you're getting in trouble. It feels like it's rough. But and I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to do this, but I've tried everything. And So I did that, and of course he absolutely hated it. Uh, and then a friend of mine, when I was in the hospital, um, I told her about it and her husband, and she called Child Protective Services on us. Didn't ask my wife. Didn't try to see what was going on. She just went for straight from there and called Child Protective Services. And so we didn't know about it until he shows up. And so he's asking questions. He asked me about that. I'm like, yeah, I do. I was busting his ass, but if I do that anymore, it's going to be child abuse. I was like, and so this is the next logical step. I'm not hurting him, but it might wake him up, get his attention. And he said, well, it's not abuse. It's unorthodox, but you didn't abuse him. You didn't hurt him. He's not being abused. Um, but but it lost friendship because instead of trying to understand or trying to talk to my wife or anything, she goes straight there, and that's why people are. Um, but that was the end of it. I was talking to TJ, and we talked about it, and he actually asked if he could have Tristan, and we had to think about it. And then I called him. I was like, of course it's up to my wife. It was, but she's the one who agreed. I told her this is what I thought. As long as he's living with me, he is never going to have a childhood because I cannot, in good conscience, reward him when he's being bad. I don't know how. And it's not fair to him. even though he is the one getting in trouble. It's still not fair that a kid doesn't have a childhood. And plus, his father has the same genetics. He may be able to actually do something. And so we talked to him and, we agreed. In fact, we told him that we'll totally wipe out all of his debt, everything he owed us. He doesn't owe us anymore. And so we just called it even and got rid of the whole child support services because, God, they were ripping everybody off. The government makes money off of child support. And we were tired of paying them because what they did was he would pay his child support and they would take a certain percentage out of the child support that we got to take care of Tristan. So yeah, it was real shitty. Anyway, so he ended up getting Tristan there. But I think that's a pretty good stop for right now because my next one is going to be talking about my back surgery. And anyway, I appreciate it. Have a blessed one.